Welcome, everybody. This is Ray of RebelEars.com. Want to thank everybody for tuning in on the YouTube channel, who's also listening on the podcast on Anchor.fm, and then also people who's listening to Instagram Live, watching. Thank everybody who's tuning in. So a few things we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about templates, presets. We're going to be talking about rough mixes, and then we also going to be talking about panning. So this all falls into the category of me as an engineer, right? So today we're going to be talking starting off with templates, right? So as an audio engineer, I did a lot of sessions. I worked with Steve Hibicki. I worked at Castle Hill Studios as an intern, but also as a mixing engineer, recording engineer. And you can ask a lot of people who's in the industry and who's even starting out. The best thing you can do, especially moving up, make sure the session is quick, it's efficient, making sure that you're getting paid as an engineer, you're giving the artist the best value for their buck, right? So the first thing you got to do, especially when you're starting off a session, you got to automatically go in and think about it this way. Okay, so the session starts at 6 o'clock. I should be at the studio at 5:45, 5:50, just to give yourself enough time to at least prep the session, right? So what I do, I have my own template. I got a few templates. So I got one when it comes to recording. I got a template when it comes to mixing. I got a template when it comes to 2 tracks and track out. So I already talked about the difference from 2 tracks and track out. So a 2 track is basically the MP3 or the WAV version of all the instrumentation, the drums, everything is together in one file, right? So track out is basically everything that's individual, the kick, snare, hi-hats, instruments, piano, guitar, whatever it might be, right? It just makes it easier for me when I communicate with the artist. Like if I'm mixing their session and they sent me a WE transfer of their session, right? Automatically I ask them a few things. Do you have anything to reference off of? Do you have the track outs for it, or is it a 2 track? Because usually 2 tracks is you can download it off of YouTube, or if you're with a producer and don't want to pay for exclusive rights, you can get non-exclusive. Depending on the deal that you get with the producer, it works out in different ways, right? So what I do with my different templates, depending on the session itself, it helps me to stay ahead of the curve, because I'm thinking on this aspect. I'm thinking, I already know for a fact I'm booked for 3-4 hours, so 6, 7, 8, 9. So probably 9, 10 o'clock, I have to leave, right? So I got to think of it this way. How can I go ahead, get into the session, get the BPM of the track, go ahead and get the vocal chain right for the artist, making sure their levels are right. I have everything set up, even with presets. So the difference from presets and templates, so a template could be for the whole session. So you have your tracks, your track might have some plugins. With me, I actually have my plugins set into my aux. The reason why, I learned this from Steve Hibicki. He was telling me that you get the natural sound of the vocals when there's no plugins on the track, but you send it to the aux, because you have more control that way. That's even with reverb delay, I tell everybody, don't put it on the track itself. Go ahead and put it into a separate aux or a bus, depending on what you want to call it, right? Because then you have more control with the fader instead of all those effects straight into the track itself. So the template, of course, like I was saying, you can have plugins on the tracks, plugins on the aux, plugins on the submaster, master, whatever you want to have it, right? So when you open up a new session with the template, automatically you can go ahead, start recording, start mixing, whatever you need to do, right? And it's more efficient that way. So with presets, let's say I have an EQ plugin, right? With the EQ, I might have a preset that deals with a telephone effect. You use a high pass filter, low pass filter, get it in the middle, and then you could go ahead and edit it that way. You already have the preset saved. So anytime an artist you know what, for this part, for the bridge or the ad-libs, I want to have, I'm on the telephone, call it telephone effect, save that preset that way, make it easy that you can go ahead and, anytime you're working with an artist, if you like something oh, I like this sound, save it as a preset to move forward with that. Instead of having to search for the session, man, I remember this one sound I like from this artist. Go ahead and save it as a preset, because a lot of people don't realize that's a good way to start your own, sound design, and to an extent, especially when it comes to vocals. But I also learned the plugins you use for vocals can be used for instruments too. So never limit yourself when it comes to that. And, working with Steve, he has multiple templates, especially working with different artists, different producers, and engineers too, because there's times when, you have 3 or 4 engineers working on one track, right? And you got to understand from different people you have to bring into the circle, right? And it's good to learn different plugins too. You never want to limit yourself with just, using the basic plugins, saying like, you know what, I'm gonna just stick with this. You should always try out new plugins, always try out new outboard gear if you have the resource. Like I was saying, if you interning, use as much as the equipment as you can, because the more you learn, the more beneficial it will be in the long run, especially when you could go into any studio and automatically set it up like, you know what, I'm ready, instead of, okay, I got to figure all this out. Take the time to think about how you want to set up your template, how you want to set up your presets. Every session, I try my best to at least have 3 to 4 different presets. Well, Steve probably don't even know. Like every session he sent me, from Trim Life 2, 3, Ransom 2, Troubles album, Edgewood, I saved a lot of presets. So I might have, so let's say I'm working with this mix that Steve wants me to work on. Like, okay, good example, Wiz Khalifa 420 Freestyle. Me and Steve, we worked on that. That was a great credit of mine. I'm happy for it. So I remember there was like this kick on the Wiz Khalifa that was dope because Mike Will made it and 30 Rock produced it, right? So what I like to do, I like to make presets of, the plugins they use. Like it might be a EQ, might be a compressor, might be some modulations, depending on, what they're using, right? Because I can go to an artist session who send me the track outs, and I can automatically open up the preset that has like Mike Will's kick or 30 Rock's hi-hat, but it's just the presets that's saved. So the artist might send me the session with the kick. It might be an EQ on there, on the kick, and I can automatically open up the preset if it's the same plugin, because when you're making a preset, it's for that actual plugin that you save it under. And with me, I do like trying different things out because Tony Maserati, who's a popular audio engineer, he worked with Beyonce, worked with a lot of different artists in the industry. He was talking about like the first thing he do when he opened up his session, he likes to test out different presets, right? Because what happens, it lets you hear different sounds from whoever created the preset. And then it also makes it simple for you too, because you might find a sweet spot just by, scrolling down the presets. So never feel like you don't need to use a preset. It's very beneficial to use. I recommend everybody to just try it out, seeing how you feel. Producers too. Like there's a lot of presets that could just be a lo-fi effect or a filtering effect, and that can make the track itself. Like I was saying, when it comes to templates, make sure that you have different templates when it comes to recording, mixing. If you're going to do 2 tracks or track outs, if you're a producer, you might have a template when it comes to the drums or the melodies. It depends on you. Be creative. You might even have a template when it comes to like scores. It just makes it easier for you to move forward with what you're doing, especially if you're trying to think long term on how you can be successful going towards, finishing what you need to do, right? And then with the presets, like I said, try out different presets, never limit yourself. Always try to discover new plugins, always try out their presets too, just to understand, because like I was saying, those are preset that was created by engineers and producers with their mindset on, this is the sweet spot that I feel this goes to. So try it out. Let me know how you feel about it. And, we could go from there to, create a catalog. So right now we're going to talk about rough mixes. So with a rough mix, what are you looking for, right? When you with an artist, as an engineer, you booked a session or you have a home studio, you're thinking of, okay, I need to get this done, right? So you might do a quick mix in the session itself. That's what I do. I make sure, try to get the levels as close as I can for the artist while in the session, because there's some engineers who feel like, I'm going to just record, and after I record, that's it. I don't do no mixing within the session. I don't do no tracking. I don't do no editing. Try to, give the artist a fuller feel before they leave the session, right? At least give the artist, something they can listen to instead of everything dry and, a lot of cuts, clipping, a lot of distortion. You didn't really EQ or compress anything. That's why I was talking about, make sure to have templates and presets, just so, if you send them a rough mix, it sounds closer to a finished mix, a final mix, whatever you want to call it, full mix. There's people who call it different things. But when it comes to that, you always want to make sure that when it comes to rough mix, you put like a limiter on there to give it like a basic mastering level, so the artists don't really have to turn up their radio so loud to the point like if they're listening Bluetooth, CD, flash drive, whatever they have, right, and they go back to the radio station, it doesn't blow up their speaker, right? You want to get it as close as you can, like look up mastering, especially, I learned that from Steve. Okay, so 2 plugins I will tell everybody that I seen in a lot of sessions while working with Steve. This is just for the rough mix. This is not for the final when it comes out on the radio, because Steve is the mixing engineer and then it goes to the mastering engineer, right? So the 2 plugins are actually by Waves. And the 2 plugins are the L2 limiter and the L3 by Waves. And it just, he always tell me when it comes to the limiter, it's the ceiling. You put it at 0.1 just to make sure that the track is not clipping. Especially, you want to give it a decent mix to the point like the artist can be like, okay, this is good to start with, because when it goes to whoever's mixing it or whoever's going to finish it up, it's not that hard for them to get a comparison, right? And again, I learned this from Leslie Braithwaite. He was talking about, like I think it was in the last podcast I was talking about, he really don't, well, of course you're going to use your own plugins, but he tried to stay close to what the artist was listening to, like how they hear themselves when they first record it, because the artist records with you and you do a quick mix, right? And then they send it to another engineer, or it might be the same engineer. But let's say it's just another engineer to prove this point, right? And so this engineer already has an idea in mind and changed the whole tonal quality of the track itself. And now the artist is not even satisfied. They're just like, well, it's cool, but this is not the same. So now the artist is unsatisfied because they're just not pleased with the final version, because it's not what they envisioned, right? So that's why, a rough mix plays a big part, because, that's the start. That's the foundation. A rough mix is basically the foundation of the structure, and you got to figure out how you're going to build this building, right? So that could be from, okay, so with the rough mix, I have these plugins. I have these automations. So automation could be something as simple as, this is something like a quick tip. When it comes to like the hook, you probably raise it up. Like the natural human hearing will notice a change in volume every 3 dB. It is funny. I tested it out. It's actually true. So you can turn it up to the 3 dB when the hook comes in, just to make it sound fuller. It's funny because the human hearing here changes, but you won't really notice it because you're just paying attention to it as a whole. So, that's just a quick tip with automation. Probably bump up the hook 3 dB from like the second hook, and it leads up to the last one. It depends. You got to do your research, see what works for you, right? And with rough mixes I worked on, I can name sessions, which I'm not going to. I remember this one session that Steve was working on, and it was another engineer. They was just the recording engineer, and he showed me the session. Like, this is what happened. He finished the mix of it, right? I'm not going to name the song. I'm not going to name the artist or the engineer, because that would be wrong on my part, because, everybody's learning. But he showed me when he first worked on it. I was like, oh my God, the levels are different. Like, he had to cut multiple cuts into just the first verse, because it was like the engineer was using like multiple microphones, or just didn't really know what he was doing, especially with compression. And, he really made the track stand out. And I was actually amazed on, how you can turn a rough mix that sounds terrible to the full mix that can sound amazing. So even the rough mix can sound bad itself. You just got to figure out what you got to do to bring it out. That's why these mixing engineers are getting paid like up to $7,000 to $10,000 a mix. Steve's in that category. Jason Joshua's in that category. Shout out Jason Joshua. And I just thankful that I can sit down, learn from Steve what I need to do, how to fix problems that can arise, because when you're getting paid this X amount of money, you really got to, prove your worth. So, the recording engineer, even they got to prove their worth. There's engineers that getting paid top dollar just to, not just to push record, but the tracking. They get in good levels because if you're working with a full band, right? You got to worry about the guitars, you got to worry about the drums, you got to worry about the piano. With the piano, it depends. It might be a grand piano, it might be a MIDI keyboard, but even with that, you still got to get the levels to coexist all together, right? Rough mix is a big play, especially, a rough mix can either make or break the track. Because when it goes to the mixing engineer, you either going to give them something that's going to be a breath of fresh air for them to work on, or it's going to be irritation. So this is a big thing, organization. With me, I have this set up with, when I open the session, this is when it comes to a full track out. So to start off, I have the 2-track to start with, especially when I'm recording, because if I have all the track outs while recording, it takes a lot of processing, and then, it could crash depending on how much RAM your computer might have. The DSP, it's a lot that goes into it. So what I do when I'm getting ready to mix, I have the first one, it'll be beat. And then the next one will be QP, that's quick punch. And I label these in colors. Well, quick punch will be yellow. The reason why, it stands out to me, and then it's easy for me to okay, I need to record. As soon as I record, I go ahead, go from QP, and right under QP, I'll have my instruments, right? But for my instruments, I'll have my drums, so kick, 808, kick, snare, hi-hat, cymbals, toms, and then from the instruments, it'll be like guitar, piano, synth, flutes, and in that order. And then, depending on how I feel, it might go from hook, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, depending on how it goes, right? Just to keep everything organized. And then I'll go straight into the aux. So with the aux, I'll have vox, that's vocals, and I put all the vocals together, or I might make an extra one when it comes to the ad-libs or the outs, depending on what I want it to sound, right? So I have vox, hook, drums, instruments, reverb, delay, different effects depending on what I have to put into it. And then I have what's called, in my opinion, I call it all pro. So all production now be the drums and the instruments, because I like to have everything individually, and then they come together to the point they go to the submaster and then the master. So that deals with making sure everything is placed, right? And then from there, it just makes it easy that an artist can, or a producer or engineer, well, not a producer. Well, it depends, because you could be a producer and be that organized, but this is when it comes to an engineer. So an engineer can open up the session and be like, okay, he's organized. And it makes it easy to go ahead and mix it and then give it to the mastering engineer. And then the rough mix turns to the final mix, then it turns to the master, and then it's on the radio. So the last thing we're going to be talking about is panning. So a lot of people try to figure out what's the purpose of panning. It can really make a track. So with panning, it's basically you have your left and your right come together, or spaced out, right? Because when I was talking about mono and stereo, mono means a signal in the middle, just one signal, and stereo means left and right. So when it comes to panning, depending on, let's say you're working on the verse, right? And the ad-libs, it could be, or, Young Jeezy, he'll have like a lot of ad-libs, right? So when it comes to the ad-libs, you might want to pan it out. You might want to do like a ping pong effect. So it could be like the artist is rapping, and then the ad-libs could be like, well, in the left ear, you might hear, yeah. And then the next ad-lib, it'll be in the right ear, that'll be like, and it'll just bring out the track more, because it's like spacious. Surround sound, basically. When you hear surround sound, that means you're hearing it front, back, left, right. And it was, I'm trying to remember if it was Star Wars that started it out, the 5.1 surround sound. I'm trying to do my history when it comes to like psychoacoustics. So psychoacoustic is the study of sound. I understood that there's a lot of people who actually take their time to pan things to make it sound like it's in front of you, it's behind you, it's on the left of you, it's on the right of you, and it just gives more of a full sound. Just like when it comes to the drums and the instruments, the vocal is mono. You might have the hi-hat, spaced out, left, right, with Pro Tools, I space out the hi-hat normally around like 30, 40, depending on how I'm feeling. Guitars, I try to give it a wide space because if it's like two different guitars, it depends. I might put it at 20. It could be all the way from 20 or 60, between 20 and 60, right? And then the kick is usually mono. Yeah, it's usually mono, snare mono. Unless you want to get more space for the vocals, you can actually pan the kick and the snare probably like 10 to 20, depending on how it sounds to you. Because Mixed by Ali actually talk about using Oratones. And he was talking about how he mixed Kendrick Lamar's projects in one speaker, mono. It was one speaker in the middle because he was talking about, like, if you could get a good sound mix in one speaker in the middle, you'll be amazed how it sounds in two speakers, stereo, right? And it's proven because with mono, you know, you can space it out to give every piece space. Because when you have two speakers, when you have it in stereo, it's actually easier to hear it because, you know, you'll hear sound coming from the left, you hear sound coming from the right. But when it's mono, you can only space it out to an extent to the point like it all works together. In mono, everything is tight. So you got to make sure you space it out to the point that it sounds natural, it sounds full, it sounds amazing. And, you know, take the time to do your research on, you know, using delay, ping pong. There's a lot of plugins. I remember there was this plugin by, I'm trying to remember, it was called, Henry got me on it. I think it was called Pancake. Yeah, Pancake. And it's basically like, it's like a waveform you see, but it goes right, left, right, left. So when it's panning, it might go, yeah, and you'll see it going from right to left. So that yeah will be on the right, and then on the left it'll be and you'll see as time goes by, you'll just get better with mixing. I love using it when it comes to R&B singers because if they have like a lot of stacks or outs, it really like complements the lead because you can space it out to the point when they harmonize, it can really be full. So it could be a high pitch, a low pitch, baritone, depending. And the high pitch, I would have it as close to the lead itself because you want it to resonate. And then when it comes very bassy, it's very good to think of like space it out just to give, you know, if you have the kick and 808 in the middle and then the low tone of the vocals, it's hard to really control. So you got to think of how you're going to space it out to work in the long run, right? And, you know, it's really easy for me, especially when you have harmonies and then you have like ad-libs that's included with the stacks, and then you have like a different kind of harmony that might go into the bridge. So it's a lot of panning I was doing. But also, even with panning, I was doing like frequency cuts and, you know, so let's say there's two vocals that sound in the same range, right? Well, this is more on the lines of mixing. So I wouldn't consider this panning, but it can actually help when it comes to harmony. So let's use this for the drums, right? So let's say, you know, the kick and the snare, space them out. So with the kick, of course, you know, that's a low frequency sound, and the snare might be, well, it depends. It could be a crack and a high pitch, or it could be low or mid. It's really how you complement each other because, okay, let's say for the kick, the part where the snare come in, with the kick probably going to come in at the same time. I don't know. It depends on how you produce the track. You could probably cut some of the frequency in the low where you boost the kick. And then, you know, the kick, you know, you use a low pass filter to let all the lows pass. And then, you know, it'll cut out the snare. But that's even, in my opinion, that deals with panning too, because you give it space for the kick to be present and even with the snare to be present, because when it comes to the low pass filter, it might be a range where the snare stands out, where the kick might clash. So you got to think of that. And frequency plays a big part in panning. A lot of people don't realize, you know, when it comes to like stereo imaging, you got to think on if it's going to like be beneficial for the track or just going to be a problem. So our discussion today was templates, presets. We also was talking about rough mixes, and we were talking about panning. And, you know, I use these on every session. I use a template when I open up a session. I bring out different presets when it comes to vocals or drums, instruments. The rough mix, either I'm recording the track and I create a rough mix, or I'm working on a rough mix, right? And with panning, 90% of the sessions I'm working on has panning. 10%, it depends. Like if it's an artist that just have one lead, no ad-libs, no outs, one hook, straight through, there's really no need for panning. So that's like 10% of the time. It really depends on who I'm working with, right? So I just want to tell everybody thank you for tuning in to the Rebel Ear podcast, watching on the YouTube channel, listening on anchor.fm/Rebel Ears, watching on Instagram Live. Thank everybody for just watching, listening, and hopefully I gave you anything that could help you to better your session, help you as an artist to understand what you need to do in the studio. And until next time, from everybody at Rebel Ears, I want to say thank you for listening.